There will be a separate presentation, and would like to pass on the floor to academician Dzhavadov. I don't think I need to introduce him because everyone knows him. Please raise your hand if you have never heard of Professor Dzhavadov. Professor, the floor is yours. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me. Vasily, please let me know if you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. First and foremost, I'd like to apologize for being a bit late. Starting from the 21st of May, we've been hosting an annual meeting at the Academy of Sciences, and I had to attend this meeting. I just arrived at my office. Unfortunately, I was unable to join you from the very beginning, and I missed some parts of Vasily's presentation. But in my presentation, I will probably touch upon some of the things that you already stated. The name of my presentation is Epizootic Situation as far as infection diseases are concerned. I will not cover all of the infectious diseases because it would take me, otherwise it would take me an hour and a half as opposed to 45 minutes. But these are the most prevalent diseases affecting poultry farms. I try to list all of them in this slide. It includes not just the most prevalent, but also the most important diseases, including the avian influenza, hepatitis E, by the way, is becoming more widespread, and we don't know the first thing about it. And unfortunately, we don't have any diagnosis or specific prevention means to deal with hepatitis E. Some people say that we can make do without imported vaccines, but this is not true. Let me be frank. We don't have any drugs against chick anemia virus and other diseases. Anyway, let's focus on the importance of diseases. In 2021, the most prevalent disease was avian influenza, and Vasily already mentioned that. If you calculate the mortality caused by the avian influenza and the number of birds that we had to slaughter because they were right next to the infected poultry farm, then you'll see that the avian influenza was the most important disease. Following avian influenza is colibacteriosis, and I will slightly touch upon that in my presentation later on. People who can clearly diagnose and then run prevention against colibacteriosis. Colibacteriosis is a secondary infection in the poultry industry. Don't even try to talk to me about the highly virulent and low virulent strains. When we try to challenge healthy chicks, even intravenous or intramuscular administration of E. coli does not reproduce colibacteriosis if we're talking about healthy birds. However, the supervisory bodies and other agencies, colibacteriosis is the most prevalent disease if you don't take into account avian influenza. 46% of the mortality is caused by colibacteriosis. I always say that it's a misdiagnosis. This is just the upper layer of the iceberg, and colibacteriosis is not the primary cause. The primary cause is the viral infection, and colibacteriosis is a secondary infection. For instance, mycoplasmosis followed by colibacteriosis. Immunodeficiency of the poultry farm because of the poor vaccination program. And it's a huge challenge as of today because preventive vaccination program is still a problem because some vets do not follow the regimen. They use live vaccines almost every other day, and of course, the efficacy goes down. first immunity mediators that have antiviral activity are produced by the body. Let me say a few words about the avian influenza, the situation as of 2021 and as of 2023. By the way, you can read the slide for yourself. I'll be talking about slightly different things. You might have seen in the media that avian influenza, there were certain outbreaks of avian influenza, and some experts say that outbreaks were observed in 13 Russian regions. Some say that they were observed in 17 Russian regions, not just in the wild, and but also in the poultry farms. For instance, outside of Yaroslavl, the Romanovskaya poultry farm is a huge farm with 22 million layers. Has reported an outbreak of avian influenza. Well, the entire head count has to be slaughtered. H5N8 strain has been reported, and H5N1 has also been registered, and the genome sequencing demonstrated that the Asian strain of avian influenza that primarily affected the Russian forest has now been found in outside Kaliningrad. And I'm more concerned about the following. We started seeing the same situation that we saw back in 2005 and 2006. I don't want to cry wolf, but Russia might become endemic in terms of avian influenza, similar to African swine fever. Africa and Russia are the two main sources of African swine fever, and we cannot use the usual techniques such as slaughtering the entire livestock. And Vasily was right in saying that there are proponents of vaccination programs and those who object to that. And some people raise their hands on both counts. By the way, Vasily, you were right in saying that everyone is talking about avian influenza, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Though I'm getting sick and tired of saying the very same things. Back in 2005, I said that we need to start vaccination. I was the first one. I was the first one to state that. There were lots of people who objected to that, and they said we want to follow in the European footsteps. We need to stamp out the avian influenza as opposed to vaccinating the head count, all the poultry farms. Most of the people who opposed vaccination now say that we do need vaccination programs. I'm not saying that we need to vaccinate every single farm as we do as with regards to the Newcastle disease. We need to take into account seasonality factors, adjacent infected poultry farms. It's still an outstanding question of whether we need to vaccinate broilers or not. I don't have an answer to that. In certain cases, we would need to vaccinate both breeders, boilers, but layers are a definite yes. Some people say that we shouldn't vaccinate because we will not be able to differentiate those vaccinated and those infected by the low pathogenic strains. Well, Vasily was right in saying that we might have some sentinel birds. Immunoglobulin M, I don't think it's going to be a practical approach to use immunoglobulin M. You can use H5N1 or H5N3 strain vaccine and then use it to control. If your pathogen is H5N1 and you see some clinical signs, then you can identify neuraminidase activity such as the delay of well, I liked everything Vasily stated in his presentation, but I believe that vaccination effectiveness should be controlled not by PCR tests or uh, ELISA assay. ELISA assay does not show you whether it's a strain virus or pathogenic virus, because we're talking about the matrix proteins, and you will not be able to differentiate between pathogenic and non-pathogenic viruses, vaccine strain or wild strain. We can argue about the efficacy of different methods, but there are methods to differentiate between vaccinated and non-vaccinated birds. I'm more concerned about Russia becoming endemic in avian influenza, similar to African swine fever. Mass media reports say that just gulls die of avian influenza. No matter what region you take, they say that it's gulls only. Gulls or synanthropic birds, they do not migrate. So what does that mean? Gulls eat waste, then they go to poultry farms and they contaminate poultry with avian influenza. I believe that this is a very dangerous and concerning situation. And some people say that vaccination does not ensure 100% protection, and we will not be able to uh, 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 export our food products. Well, China vaccinates its poultry against avian influenza, and this is an adjacent. Well, Kazakhstan vaccinated its poultry farms, and they no longer have the avian influenza problem. I recently visited adjacent countries, and I see that they vaccinate poultry against avian influenza, and they don't face this challenge. Even if the protection is not 100%, well, let's not vaccinate the poultry against the Newcastle disease, the Marek disease. Are you saying that the immune protection is 100%? It's never the case. There will still be infected poultry farms, and I believe that we should vaccinate poultry against avian influenza, and I have no doubt that sooner or later Russia will arrive at this decision. OIE states that vaccination should be a must. The Russian poultry industry differs drastically from the foreign poultry farms. Well, I visited the US and France and their poultry farms. Their head count is 20 to 40,000 birds. And in our case, we have like 5 million layers. It's a powder keg if it gets infected. And if you're saying that we should follow in the footsteps of the West and should not vaccinate our poultry, this is a totally wrong approach from my viewpoint. We would need to vaccinate the poultry against avian influenza. We slaughtered millions of birds. The Smena poultry farm is a good example. It was one of the largest poultry farms, and it slaughtered the entire livestock. And Smena was the main supplier of broilers. And I believe that vaccination is the only way forward, even if it does not provide 100% protection. Even if the protection is 90%, vaccination should be the right way forward. I'm not gonna go over the map. I just wanted to demonstrate you this diagram with the outbreaks of avian influenza. Outbreaks usually happen in Q3. Right now it's Q2, so we should get ready for an outbreak in Q3. Wild migrating birds fly everywhere, and you cannot shoot them down, as was once proposed by Mr. Zhirinovsky. They do not recognize any borders. They will migrate to northern and southern areas depending on the season. Now let me move on to the Newcastle disease. I'll be brief. There is not a single poultry farm, even small size farms, that wouldn't vaccinate their poultry against the Newcastle disease. every single year, several farms get infected with Newcastle disease. And I believe that, well, we have a federal R&D center and the representatives are there in the room. And I believe that we should develop a vaccine that would be effective against the Newcastle disease. Some people argued about genotype 7, should we cover it or not? When the Newcastle disease genotype 7 was isolated in Uzbekistan, and by the way, the R&D center told us this genotype is still part of the serotype 1, and the antibodies for Lasota would protect the poultry against genotype 7. In theory, it should have been the case. Antibodies are similar, but in practice, they don't. Genotype 7 spreads across Russia. For instance, we see that in Russia, in southern parts, in the Transcaucasian countries, and genotype 7 is quite prevalent in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. It is a challenge. There are no specific prevention means against genotype 7. It wouldn't be a problem to develop this vaccine. It's relatively easy and simple. And well, VNIP is no longer an R&D center. We don't have any scientists. And when people say that there is a veterinary or poultry industry R&D center, I always say it's all about people. It's not about the title on the building. Unfortunately, we don't have any scientists manning this R&D center. So it's a huge, I mean, people and the new vaccine development is a problem. And that includes vaccine against Newcastle disease genotype 7. Lasota vaccine only offers partial protection, and Mark disease serotype 3 offers partial protection, but it does not offer 100% protection. Therefore, the Mark disease might be a problem, and serotype 3 is only used for broilers. I'm going to skip these slides. I don't want to go into details on that. Let's focus on colibacteriosis. Like I said, this is the number one challenge as of the present time. And I know for a fact that Zoetis, for instance, developed a vaccine and it's pushing it actively in the market because it wants us to use it against colibacteriosis. Of course, the antigen is the same, and if you vaccinate you vaccinate with one serotype, you will not ensure 100% protection. The homologous vaccine, by the way, I was one of the first ones to develop homologous vaccine against the Gumboro disease in the Siniavinska poultry farm. It used to be heavily infected with the Gumboro disease, and it almost went bankrupt. And it was a poultry farm for a one company, a city. The economic losses were about 3 billion Russian rubles, and the inactivated vaccine against the Gumboro disease solved the problem altogether. Let me go back to the immunodeficiency problem in the poultry. The widespread use of vaccines. Well, we vaccinate birds during the first 20 days. I'm talking about broilers now. And slaughtering happens on day 30 and day 35. It doesn't make any sense to vaccinate the poultry on day 34 because you need to wait for at least 2 weeks for the humoral immunity to kick in. So that means at least 6 vaccinations, twice for Gumboro disease, twice for bronchitis, twice for the Newcastle disease. Some are vaccinated for AIL as well. So 6 to 10 vaccinations within 20 days. Immunology says that the interval between vaccinations should be 2 weeks. So the arithmetic, it's a simple math problem. 6 vaccinations at an interval of 2 weeks within 20 days. It's a problem that cannot be solved. you should replace live vaccines with inactivated or even vector vaccines. I'm a strong proponent of vector vaccines, and I take pride in saying that for the first time, Russia has developed a Gumboro uh, recombinant vaccine. It has been jointly developed by our R&D center and the St. Pete R&D center. And two of my students developed this vaccine and defended a PhD thesis based on that. I criticized the PhD board because oftentimes they just compare Chinese, US, and Russian produced penicillin. It's not a scientific paper, you know. We need to start developing new things. Otherwise, we will turn our scientists into morons who do nothing and who do not develop anything new. They just come to work 9 to 5, and it's a huge problem. We need to keep on developing our science and push it forward. The veterinary science was used to be at the forefront, and I'm quite frank about that. Some people don't like me saying that, but the veterinary poultry industry used to be a serious scientific R&D center. You can argue whose methionine is better, either national or foreign made, whose amino acids or nutrients are better, but it takes practical developments. You can argue about the efficacy of a national mark vaccine or the Newcastle disease, but the Gumboro inactivated vaccine developed in Russia was better. The Malushko developed vaccine was better than foreign analogs. AIL aerosols are not a solution to the problem. If you use aerosol spray, then the mortality will go up. So I believe that our scientists had some great things to offer. I left the veterinary poultry industry R&D center, but I'm still an employee of a lab that deals with huge problems. There are lots of challenges facing the veterinary medicine in the poultry industry right now. And right now, for instance, no one deals with the turkey challenges. Turkey farms are spreading all across Russia. Their numbers are growing, and the number of diseases affecting turkeys is going up. However, not a single R&D center focuses on that. We started doing that, and we've made some progress. I'm not gonna put the cart before the horse, though. Just a few words about the colibacteriosis prevalence. These are the serotypes. Oftentimes, we isolate the so-called high virulent strains in the poultry farms. And now our tests show that these are not highly virulent strains. What do we do? First and foremost, we need to develop vaccines, and I'm talking about homologous vaccines. That's exactly what we did in the Sinyavinsk poultry farm affected by the Gumboro disease. We used Intravet, Mirial vaccines. It didn't help. National vaccines did not help either. The mortality was still high. And we used a very simple approach, a down-to-earth approach. I was criticized back then. I was told that the supervisory agency will never approve the paperwork for this homologous vaccine. And by the way, we've been testing this vaccine in different animals, not just poultry. For instance, we developed a vaccine against mastitis, bovine mastitis. They used microbes from the udder. They inactivated this the virus, and mastitis is no longer a problem. We did the same for for fish and sheep. And I believe that homologous vaccines are the way to go. As for getting approvals for the paperwork and so on and so forth, I believe this is the wrong approach. About 5 years ago, I visited the French Grimaud company that delivered geese and ducks to Russia, supplied geese and ducks to Russia. And I saw people in a lab inactivating viruses in petri dishes. And I asked them, "What are you doing?" And they told me that they developed vaccine for a specific poultry farm. Uh, they told me that they developed homologous vaccine in France, and I asked them about the approvals and so on and so forth. And they said that they just sent a vet to the poultry farm, and this vet came up with a recipe, and a simple lab developed the homologous vaccine. And the Russian approach is totally wrong because, sometimes people who are not scientists are responsible for approving vaccines. Right now, it costs a lot to get an approval for a vaccine, and I don't think an SME would have enough budget to develop the paperwork for a new drug. For instance, you have a young expert who developed a drug. You will not be able to get an approval because it would take several million to go to Rossellkostnadzor, a supervisory agency, and get an approval for a new vaccine because it costs just too much. And that causes additional problems in Russia. We need to facilitate the work of young scientists and experts. We should not impose too many tests on them. This is the homologous vaccine that some farms are using. They isolate E. coli and then inactivate the virus. By the way, Zoetis offers a live vaccine featuring a common antigen, but it only provides a partial protection. I am a strong proponent of homologous vaccine. Just keep in mind that it would take a specific homologous vaccine for every specific form. I hope I'm not over time. If you have any questions about my controversial presentation, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you so much, Mr. Dzhavadov. Any questions? Yes, go ahead, please.
Добрый день, спасибо огромное за действительно.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I have a very practical and down-to-earth question. You talked a lot about genotype 7 of the Newcastle disease. What should vets do to diagnose genotype 7, and what should labs do to confirm the diagnosis? Well, the clinical signs are very similar to that of the conventional Newcastle, such as CNS damage, strokes, diarrhea, and the hemorrhage between gizzard and granular stomach. But ultimately, you would need to run lab tests. To confirm genotype 7, well, not every lab will be able to do that. I know it for a fact that the R&D Center for Animal Health can do that, but it takes specific lab tests to differentiate between genotype 1 and genotype 7 of the Newcastle disease. Your regional lab will not be able to run genome sequencing. Our R&D center can do that, but it's still difficult. As for vaccination, like I said, in Southeast Asia, they produce vaccines against genotype 7. They tried to get an approval in Russia. I have no idea whether they succeeded or not. South Korea, a South Korean company, I don't recall the name, but it attended a Moscow-based show about 45 years ago, and they actually demonstrated genotype 7 vaccine. Many vets in Russia stated that they didn't want to apply it. Many poultry farms should use Lasota against the Newcastle disease. C2B prime French vaccines and other vaccines should not be applied instead of Lasota. I don't think Russia should do that. Given the epizootic situation in Russia, we will not be able to succeed without Lasota. Vaccination one should be C1 or B prime and then Lasota, regardless of whether we are talking about layers or broilers. Thank you so much. One last brief question, and I really hope that you're going to be brief. Good afternoon. My question is about avian influenza. It's a challenge for most of the poultry farms. So actually, I have two questions about avian influenza. The first one is as follows. Do broiler antibodies protect them against infection with avian influenza? That's question one. And the second question is, do broilers who have antibodies, if vaccinated, will it interfere with the replication of the vaccine strain? Thank you for an excellent question. Let's talk about the breeders rather than broilers. Maternal antibodies transferred to broilers, both passive and active. This is what we should be talking about. As far as avian influenza is concerned, the titer 1 to 16 is considered to offer protection. I don't support this opinion. I don't think they ensure protection. In the Newcastle disease, a titer of 1 to 8 or higher ensures 100% immunity. But in case of avian influenza, it doesn't. And 1 to 8, 1 to 16, 1 to 32 does not offer 100 protection. It ensures protection against mortality, but it does not offer protection against infection and replication. The same holds true for the Marek disease. Vaccination prevents tumors, but it doesn't protect against being infected with the wild strain. I believe that the titer should be at least 1 to 64, both maternal and active immunity. That's what I'm talking about. Our data proves that this is the titer that offers the protection against infection. Will this titer interfere with the vaccination efficacy? Inactivated vaccine will not be affected by the antibodies in broilers. It will not interfere. Antibodies will only interfere with live vaccine, and that's true for Gumboro. The affinity of maternal antibodies prevents circulation of the vaccine strain in vaccinated birds, but for other diseases, it's no longer the case. Oftentimes, vets confuse it and they say that bronchitis is the same as the Gumboro disease, but you vaccinate against infectious bronchitis on day one, and the breeders are also vaccinated. Antibodies do not neutralize the viral strain. Sorry for the pun, but these antibodies do not interfere with the replication of the viral strain. And right now we offer only inactivated vaccine. No matter what the titer is, maternal antibodies do not interfere with the post-vaccinal immunity. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our presenter. Thank you so much.